Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Nick Files. I'm your host, Nick Mulay. I got quite an exciting next new slideshow that I'm going to be presenting today. I actually just had it completed literally just minutes before I got on here. So I just got to say, just before we get started, I definitely did like the reviews, if you will, of how last week's episode went when I made this change from historical and haunted locations to cryptids. And the feedback I got from this was definitely a lot more than what I was expecting. So it's nice that a lot of you guys really enjoyed with what I presented. So because of those reasons, I'm going to continue on, obviously, with these cryptids. Which, once again, for those that don't know, it's just going to be a limited amount because trying to put all these cryptids together would take too much work for me. So again, I'm kind of doing this by seasons. Pickle Tom! All right, Pickle Tom, he's here. So for today's episode, we are going to be focusing on, you could pretty much say, somewhat of a type of Bigfoot, but often one that's not really as famous compared to the Pacific Northwestern version or the Southern version, if you will. Hello, Michael. Good to see you. The old Bigfoot hunter says hi. Well, if you're going to tune into this one, this is one that might be right up your alley then, Michael, because this is based on a Bigfoot type creature, as a matter of fact. Okay, now let's see what Tom here say now. One never knows when Pickle Tom will creep it. Yeah, that's who you are. So, anyways, yeah, we're going to be focusing on one that often doesn't get as much attention or notoriety, although it has started to become more notorious over the last couple of years. And oh my God damn it, Tom, Butthead Levy set up your alley. It hasn't even been 5 minutes. You're already starting to make me laugh. Damn it. Oh, and by the way, because he's on, please make sure to go and subscribe to youtube.com/this is Tom's World. No apostrophe, of course. Yeah, that's what you do. So, anyways, the cryptid we're going to be talking about tonight again is another cryptid that's also rumored was said to have terrorized southern Illinois once again, which is kind of ironic that it's roughly this first, for starters, this was a creature that invaded another small Illinois town in southern Illinois, literally just an hour and a half southwest from Enfield, when the Enfield horror was terrorizing Enfield, Illinois in April of 1973. And this happened to occur just 2 months later. So in this case, the creature I'll be presenting in this matter is what's known as the Big Muddy Monster, or Murfreesboro Mud Monster. Practically, it's pretty much Illinois' version of, or in this case, Southern Illinois' version of Bigfoot. And honestly, it really wasn't until about 10 years ago that I discovered about this, because it was at one point featured on a segment of Monsters and Mysteries in America. And I think they also recently just made a documentary film about, I know Chad Lewis just recently wrote a book about it, which I was able to finally meet him and was able to talk to him for a couple minutes at a Paracon earlier this year. In fact, he was going down to the Big Muddy Monster Festival, which I was completely unaware of, which I would have killed to go down to that one, because that sounded like it was a really awesome event. But unfortunately, Murfreesboro is about a 6.5 hour drive. It's way, way down at the foot of southern Illinois. So what's up? Hello, Rita. Good to see you. Yes, just go to this link. See? But anyways, without further ado, like I said, this is almost kind of like a continuation from last week's show, because again, it was not far from Enfield, and this occurred 2 months after the Enfield horror sighting. So I guess you can kind of say we can continue on with what we were talking about last week, but at the same time, still talk about a different, separate story on an entirely different creature. And you guys will notice real quick that, because I know some people think, well, wouldn't the Enfield horror and the Big Money Monster basically be the same creature because it was sighted in two small towns in southern Illinois? No, you'll notice obviously a complete different description between the two. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me just go through this. Always have to go through this routine. There's a damn cats. Okay, so what do we got here from Michael? Bigfoot researcher for almost 40 years up here in northern Minnesota. Wow, that's quite a lot of work you put in there, Michael. That's awesome. Well, if you haven't heard this story before, you're about to find out yourself. I mean, you're about to find out now for yourself. So let me just go through. I'm trying to get the slideshow up. And let's see. See, I always have to kind of watch on the video on the phone itself to make sure that the presentation's actually showing. Okay. All right, we're good. So, like I said, once again, I forgot to add a fade in for this. So, like I said, we'll be talking in this case about what's known as the Big Muddy Monster or Murfreesboro Mud Monster. So, to give a little history first, once again, to the area, hang on one second. And there's a piece of cat here. Damn cats have been walking around lately on near my computer. Okay, there we go. It wasn't actually on the camera. It was just distracting me on the screen. But anyways, let's get started. The vast reaches of forest and open fields of southern Illinois, combined with the sparse population in some areas, seem to invite weirdness that might not occur in cities and more crowded locals. In the most southern portions of the region, the Shawnee National Forest covers miles and miles of territory. The acres of forest seem almost untouched by man, and some believe that strange things occasionally pass through here, unseen by human eyes. And even just looking at such landscapes like that, you can pretty much tell that's definitely and clearly a perfect area for an unknown creature to hide, that's for sure. But just looking at this, it's almost hard to believe that this is in my state, just way further south. It looks like something from a different state. I mean, it resembles more like that of, Kentucky or Tennessee, but that's southern Illinois for you. So like I always said, like I probably said in the last episode, there's a big difference when you're up here in northern Illinois where Chicago is, and in southern Illinois, it's a completely different world down there. So yeah, that's southern Illinois for you. But anyways, in the summer of 1973, the town of Murfreesboro in southwestern Illinois was the site of a bizarre series of monster sightings. The enigmatic creature, now recalled as the Murfreesboro Mud Monster or Big Muddy Monster because of its indefinable features and mysterious presence. This bizarre brute tormented the citizens of this small community, which is tucked away in the southwestern region of the state, for approximately 14 days before its reign of terror abruptly ended. In its wake, the monster left a number of confused and frightened witnesses, baffled law enforcement officials, and of course, an enduring legend, resulting in one of the strangest, in some ways most frightening cases in the history of Bigfoots. So to give a description on this creature, like I did with last week's episode of the Enfield Horror, in documented sighting reports, the creature is described as a lumbering and muscular hominid-like hulk, roughly 7 to 9 feet tall and wide, like a very big bone man, and weighing around 300 to 400 pounds. The Big Muddy Monster is covered with very dirty, matted white hair on most of its body. That's the other thing too, compared to unlike other types of like Bigfoot or Sasquatch or skunk ape type creatures, where they're usually like black, brown, red. I mean, or kind of reddish or reddish brown color. Once in a while, you might get maybe like a gray of some sort. It's relatively rare when you come across a type of Bigfoot that its hair is white in color. And I know some people often usually associate that more with the Yeti in Asia and in Nepal, to be more exact. And what's funny is, and I'll probably say this again when I eventually do an episode on the Yeti, but contrary to popular belief, the Yeti is not actually white in colors. It's often, I mean, not actually white is often shown on television. Um, it may have a whitish look to it based on some of the encounters, but that's only when it's covered in snow. It's actually said to be more brown, black in color. But in this case, with the big money monster, it actually is white in color, but covered, but in a, but not fully white, if you will, because during several sightings, the witnesses stated the hair was always covered and matted with mud and dirt and pieces of plants, grass, twigs, branches, leaves, and rocks. So definitely a very dirty type appearance. So the best way I could really say is that it seems to be obviously some type of Bigfoot, a swamp monster, or a skunk ape type creature. Its feet, as well as the tracks it leaves, are over a foot long. Many witnesses claim they can never see the creature's face due to it being covered by its long, dirty white hair and mud. But most agree on the fact that the only facial feature they could see, especially at night, is that it had red glowing eyes, though sometimes yellow teeth were also seen. The encounters are always accompanied by a foul stench. So another example of basically resembling more like that of the skunk ape. In some cases, it was said to resemble a creature from the movie The Swamp Thing. The vocalizations it makes are compared to an eagle shrieking into a loud speaker, and also appears to be aggressive and territorial. A long-haired beast, very big and very muddy. It's thought to be a variety of Bigfoot, but one that uses the Big Muddy River as its primary means of migrating. So, to begin the sightings, while there are some who suggest that the first account of this creature came from an unnamed man who claimed to have seen the monster one evening while gardening outside of his isolated Westwood Hills area home before it was developed into a neighborhood in the 1950s. Also, a year before the incidents, on July 16th, 1972, when a jogger reported seeing something like the Murfreesboro mud monster near the Ohio River levee at Cairo in Alexander County, which, by the way, in case you guys should know, that's the southernmost town or city in the entire state of Illinois. It's literally right on the board, pretty much close to where the Illinois, Missouri, and Kentucky borders meets. So it's right on like the edge of the state. But although a jogger reported that in Cairo, most agree that the first official encounter with this decidedly unhygienic beast occurred at approximately midnight on June 25th, 1973. The June 25th, 1973 sighting, according to the Murfreesboro Police Department, I was actually trying to switch between the names. The Big Muddy Monster remains one of two open cases in the history of the department. So, to get to the first official sighting, now I know it's going to be really small for you guys to see on the screen, but I'm able to see it perfectly well because it is a pretty long story. On a hot and humid evening on June 25th, 19-year-old Randy Needham and 28-year-old Judy Johnson were parked nearby the boat ramp at Riverside Park, overlooking the Big Muddy River, parked by a desolate riverside for a romantic interlude when they came face to face with a huge, wet, hairy, and slathered monstrosity with a penchant for disturbing teenage lovers. So, basically, you have Randy Needham and Judy Johnson, and who knows what they're doing there. However, here's the thing. Johnson's father, get this, Johnson's father had expressively forbidden his daughter from dating Needham, adding to that, both of whom were married, but not to each other, which is why the pair chose such an isolated location for their illicit rendezvous. It would be a decision which they would soon come to regret. According to their account, Johnson claimed that they were listening to the radio, engaged in a debate about when they should leave, and presumably doing what couples are wanting to do when they heard a piercing roar, which Needham compared to an eagle shrieking into a microphone that seemed to emanate from the thick underbrush near the woods, not far from his car. A foul, putrid smell also followed. Then, a huge mud-covered beast emerged from the river. This image right here is actually a still image from the Monsters and Mysteries in America's segment when they covered it. So it's a pretty famous image. So I thought I definitely would use it for that matter. So if you guys haven't seen the episode, I mean that segment, I mean it's short, but it's still real. It doesn't cover all the sightings, of course, but it's still a really fascinating segment. But that's an actual still shot from the Monsters and Mysteries in America segment from 10 years ago. So Needham quickly snapped off the radio and scanned the area, listening intently. Suddenly, another horrific shriek echoed through the night, accompanied by a rattling of the brushwood in front of them. Needham flicked on his headlights, and Johnson gasped as they both saw a huge, foul-scented creature lumbering toward them, a creature whose very existence would tax the limits of their imaginations. They described it being 7 to 8 feet tall, weighing about 400 pounds, having white fur caked with mud from the river, having a horrible odor, and glowing red eyes staring at them. Whatever it was, it continued to make the horrible sound, and they later described the noise as something not human. The creature appeared to be walking on two legs and unleashed another roar until it lurched toward their car, which of course scared the couple to death. As the creature loomed closer, its cry began to intensify, alarming them even more. When it was about 20 feet away, Needham was finally able to start the car and wasted no time in starting and accelerating away from the scene with his frightened girlfriend. As the pair entered more civilized territory, they drove in stunned silence for a few moments before discussing whether or not they should report their encounter to the police. Johnson knew full well that once they made an official report, it would reveal their secret romance to both her and Needham's parents. But she decided, well, not to mention their spouses, of course, forgot to add that. But she decided that the trouble she was bound to get into when her father and husband found out about Needham was nothing compared to what the monster they just saw might be capable of. It was then that the selfless duo made a beeline from the Murfreesboro police station. The couple arrived at the station and made out what is known as an unknown creature report, describing a beast that looked like an oversized gorilla. Former patrolman, now retired Murfreesboro Police Chief Ron Manwaring, is still able to recite the facts of this strange incident from memory 50 years later. What he said was, the first report came in just before midnight on June 25th. A couple had been parked near the boat dock on the southwestern edge of Riverside Park, next to the woods. The two, who were not married, said they were in the car when they heard a loud screaming sound in the wooded areas and observed a large creature approximately 7 feet tall. The creature appeared to have light-colored hair matted with mud. The creature appeared to be walking on two legs and was proceeding toward his car. I think those people saw something that scared the hell out of them, said Larry Tincher, at the time a police sergeant who photographed the strange tracks that night. I really don't know what it could have been. Manwaring felt that the couple's account was lent credibility due to the fact that they risked exposing their alleged indiscretions, which would no doubt bring them public ridicule, and even more alarmingly, Johnson's father and husband's wrath, because they were so frightened by what they had seen by the river. There was no advantage for them to come up and report this. While the officers who took down Needham and Johnson's statement were understandably skeptical of the event, they dolefully sent out two patrolmen, Officer Merle Lindsay and Jimmy Nash, to investigate the report. Within minutes of the sightings, the officers arrived at the boat ramp in the Riverside Park area to inspect the scene. Now, this is an actual photograph of, strangely, it's actually part of a larger photo, but for some reason I was only able to find kind of like a fragment of it, and that is of Officer Jimmy Nash investigating. Although skeptical at first, Officer Nash was the first to discover a plethora of peculiar tracks, approximately 10 to 12 inches long and approximately 3 inches wide and 3 to 4 inches deep, deeply impressed in the mud by the riverbank. Recently, the river flooded the area, leaving it a soupy, muddy mess and making identifying footprints impossible. Nash claimed that as he bent over to inspect the prints from a closer vantage point, he was shocked to hear a horrifically shrill screech and tremendous roar nearby. Nash and Lindsay took off post haste with Nash. Post haste with Nash, accidentally dropping his revolver in his panic, and was so frightened he didn't want to go back for it until the morning. They ran like hell, Tincher said with a laugh. Nash lost his gun and had to go back to get it. The officer who admitted that he initially thought the story to be little more than hogwash described the hideous sound as the most incredible shriek I've ever heard. It was in those bushes. It was no bobcat or screech owl. We hightailed it out of there. Nash and Lindsay quickly went back to the station to report their findings and gather more men for a search party. The officers later estimated that whatever had made that sharp cry was no more than 300 feet away from them. Now, approximately 2 hours later at 2 a.m. on June 26th, officers Nash and Lindsay returned to the scene, accompanied by Officer Bob Scott and, surprisingly, Randy Needham. This time, they discovered more tracks, and Lindsay left to go and get a camera. They were able to create a plaster cast of one of the tracks, and this is the actual photo of one of the plaster casts that they made of the tracks. Of course, shortly after this photograph was taken, the terror was not over just yet. So, because the others followed the new footprints, tracing their path along the river. As the beams of the flashlights probed the parking lot and trees, suddenly, from the dark woods about 100 yards away, came the creature's terrifying scream. Needham identified the scream as the same as what he and Johnson heard earlier. They didn't wait to see if they could spot the monster, and instead made a quick retreat for the patrol car. During the encounter, get this, and this is not often usually talked about in the story, one of the officers also managed to briefly record the creature's scream on a recorder. After waiting in the darkness for a little while, no doubt for waiting for the beast to attack, the men managed to regain their courage and got back out again, and spent the rest of the night trying to track down a splashing sound they heard in the distance, which they described it as being like a large creature rushing through the knee-deep water in the distance to no avail. When daylight came, the creature had vanished. Years later, the officers were still shaken when talking about the incident. As the sun rose, the men felt that the so-called monster would evaporate with the rest of the night's shadows, never to be seen again. But this presumably nocturnal fiend had a surprise in store for them. Now, before I continue on, I just brought up obviously about this recording, that this brief recording that they made. You see obviously kind of a similarity between with what I was talking about last week of the Enfield horror, and that the unfortunate realization is that that recording is unavailable. Well, in the case with the Big Money Monster, this brief recording is actually on YouTube. I was able to track it down and I was able to add it to the slideshow. So I do have the actual recording. So the recording is brief. It's really probably no more than maybe 20 or 30 seconds. But although the recording is relatively short, I must warn you guys, although obviously the recording has an old sound to it, you can clearly hear the roars of the Big Money Monster. And I'll tell you right now, the sounds it emanates is truly absolutely terrifying. So I'm just going to warn you guys, this is a very scary sound clip that you're going to hear. And while that's playing, I'm going to actually go back just to catch up on the comments. So, but like I said, though, listener discretion is advised. This is a very intense and terrifying audio clip. So here it is. Hopefully you guys can hear it. Yeah, it's like I said, it's short lived, but man, that's quite a terrifying clip. Real quick. Excuse me, I can't talk today. Let's see here. Just want to catch up on everybody who's been watching. Okay, who do we got? Okay, Michael. Hey, Google up Bigfoot the Ambush on YouTube. This old Bigfoot hunter has seen a lot. I'll definitely make sure to do that. What's up, Charles? Good to see you. I'm definitely doing well. You know, actually, I think it's just probably worth bringing this up real quick. So a lot of people have been asking, hope I'm well. A couple days ago, I was actually sick. So I don't know if you guys could tell, but I do kind of have a little bit of a different sounding to my voice, if you will, because it's still just some of the fluid packed up. So don't mind that. The good part is I'm better and I don't have to worry about, being like terribly sick anymore. But anyways, didn't really see too much in the comments, so we're going to continue on then. Now, the next sighting that occurred after the events of June 25th or in early morning of June 26th, the next one occurred just several hours later. At approximately 10:30 p.m. on the evening of June 26th, 5-year-old Christian Barrel was playing in his backyard, which was located relatively close to the Big Muddy River, attempting to catch fireflies in a glass jar his mother had given him. The child frolicked about delightedly when he spied a colossal white shape looming up from behind the fence that separated his yard from the neighbor's property, the Ray family. The terrified Barrel dropped his jar and raced inside, crying out, "Daddy, Daddy, there's a big ghost in the backyard." The child's father was understandably dubious of his son's story. That was until his neighbors corroborated the tale. Now, I know what some of you guys are thinking, because, well, if you watched last week's show, I know it sounds like I'm repeating a story, right? Well, because of that, well, actually, no, before I get to that, Barrel, now 55, says he can't recall a specific mental image of the creature, but he clearly remembers the panic and terror he felt as he turned to run toward the lights of his house. "I remember being really scared," Barrel recalled. "I remember being terrified. I will never forget that. I ran as fast as I could. Now, but anyways, yeah. Now I know some of it sounds oddly familiar to last week's episode, and it's pretty much a reason why I'm going to kind of make it almost like a recap, if you will. This account of a terrifying backyard encounter is uncannily similar to one that befell another young Illinois boy named Greg Garrett just 2 months earlier on April 25th. Garrett claimed to have been attacked while playing in his backyard by a truly bizarre, slimy, three-legged beast known as the Enfield Horror. Like Beryl, Garrett immediately retreated to the relative safety of his parents' house. Now, this is another small one, so I can read it perfectly from my side. While Beryl was sobbing in his father's arms, 17-year-old Cheryl Ray, now Cheryl Rath, housewife and mother of two, was sitting on her darkened back porch next door with her young boyfriend, 17-year-old Randy Creeth, which the house was also close by the river. The pair claimed that they were talking and looking at the stars when they heard a rustling in the bushes about 15 feet away from the porch. Assuming that it was neighborhood kids coming to spy on them, an enraged Ray went inside to turn on the porch light, while Creeth, the son of a state trooper, now a minister of the First Baptist Church in Sheffield, Iowa, leapt to his feet and opened the door intending to investigate. This intention vanished the moment that the light came on, revealing the same appalling muddy white creature that had terrified Beryl just 10 minutes before, as well as Needham and Johnson, and later officers Nash, Lindsay, and Scott the previous night, staring at them with red glowing eyes. It stood about 7 feet tall and had long ape-like arms, and they estimated that it weighed at least 350 pounds. Cheryl would insist that the eyes were actually glowing and were not reflecting light from some other source. Ray recounted the scene. Randy and I were sitting in my parents' breezeway when we heard something in the woods. We both went down, but Randy was walking a little bit ahead. Then he said, "Come here." And there it was. We stood there looking at it. Creeth and Ray stood frozen with shock as this filthy white monstrosity seemed to stare back at them. Creeth, who drew a sketch of the creature, revealing a distinctly spade-shaped flatwoods monster-like head, recalled the moment vividly. The thing I remember was the bulk of it, the shape, the human form, and the stench of the river slime it apparently had on it. It was about 8 feet tall, and at least as stocky as a New York football player. We were within 15 feet of it, close enough to see the body, the texture of the fur, long and hairy, like an English sheepdog. Cheryl turned on the porch light, and Randy went for a closer look. Creeth later claimed that the animal stared at them for what felt like a long time, although he later estimated that the incident lasted only about 30 seconds. Both agreed that the creature had glowing red eyes, which Creeth accredited to the glow of a distant streetlight. The description of the eyes is significant if one is to assume that the Murfreesboro mud monster is actually a prototypical Sasquatch-like creature that just happens to be albino. The creature, which that probably would explain its white-haired appearance and perhaps the reason why even though a lot of these Bigfoot type and skunk ape type creatures are often said to have a very dirty and certainly very bad smell appearance, the reason there's a kind of a partial difference for the big money monster. The reason why I think for the majority of its body was covered with all this mud and river slime is because it was suffering maybe some type of albinism, which caused its hair to turn white. And we see this with certain types of animals, like sheep, for example, where most sheep are usually white in color, but every once in a while you get a black sheep, which is more, despite its appearance, it's actually more brownish color. And its mate, and when it comes to mating season, usually a female for the most part, normally would find that type of appearance relatively unattractive. So it could be the same in this case with Sasquatch in this matter. It probably has all this mud to kind of covered on it in order to kind of blend in and give the appearance of like what a typical Bigfoot or skunk ape normally looks like, which is again either having black, brown, reddish, or reddish brown or gray fur. So that's probably why it's all covered in mud and river slime to basically hide its albinism. The creature seemed unconcerned and finally ambled off into the woods. Ray also described the beast, which she claimed bore inhuman features and stood more erect than an ape. It was real tall, hairy. I think it was white, but it was dirty, matted. It had a real bad odor. It was really rank. I never smelled anything like it. It seemed like an eternity we stood there. And then it just turned around and walked off into the woods. We could hear it trampling through the woods. Investigators would later find a trail of broken tree branches and crushed undergrowth, along with a number of large footprints. They also noticed a strong odor left in the monster's wake, but it didn't last for very long. While red and pink eyes are a common trait in animals lacking pigmentation, Ray, unlike Kreeft, would insist that the beast's eyes were actually glow. Oh wait, hang on a second. I'm gonna have to change that later. Now, this description of glowing eyes is very similar to that of another ape-like monster, the aptly named Orange Eyes, which is actually more known as the Ohio Grassman, which is said to skulk around lakes, forests, and cemeteries near Cleveland, Ohio. Although, I'll save this for another episode, most people who've encountered the Ohio Grassman, in this matter, normally never reported glowing eyes associated with that creature. But they've often actually said perhaps most likely Orange Eyes and the Ohio Grassman are most likely the same creature because it's not terribly far where they've often been seen. Real quick, because I did notice, I just want to give some shout outs because I do see more people have come in. Let's see here. Okay, so Charles here, that sound was definitely a Sasquatch talk. Yeah, you're probably right. What's up, Lauren? Great to see you here, as always. Hello, Natalie. Oh, it's really growing. Okay, so let's get right back. So if that wasn't enough for these two sightings that occurred in one night, and very similar to what happened the previous night, get this. Officers Nash and Manwaring responded, and while they were at the scene, Christian Barrel's father came up to them and said his son had also seen the creature on the edge of the woods. My partner and I decided to go down to the area where they saw this thing, Manwaring said. Officers Nash and Manwaring were swiftly dispatched to the scene, where they noticed a powerful odor that quickly dissipated. They also found a cluster of footprints through the bushes and noticed a slimy film on the tree branches where the creature had been lurking. I saw the substance and smelled the smell myself, he said. Following the officer's discovery, then Chief Toby Berger immediately dispatched the rest of his men to the scene, all 14 of them then sent for an officer and trained dog handler with the nearby Carbondale Police Department, a man named Jerry Nellis. Nellis was the owner of a tough German Shepherd named Rep, who had assisted the Murfreesboro police in the past as a search and rescue, attack dog, and most pertinently as a man, or in this case, monster tracker. The officers, armed with rifles, revolvers, and flashlights, discovered a trail of unidentified black slime that seemed to lead directly from the Ray's back porch to the river. The dog immediately was sent in pursuit of the monster. He managed to track the creature through the woods and down a hill to a small pond. Eventually, the trees and undergrowth became too thick for the dog to continue, and it was pulled off the track just moments after almost pulling its handler down a steep embankment. Jeez. The officers began searching the area with flashlights, and the dog began sniffing near the trees, hoping to pick up the scent again. He then set off toward an abandoned barn, but refused to go inside. Get that. In fact, the animal began shaking with fear and barking. This mystified both Nellis and the officers, who had noted over the years that Reb was the most relentless tracking dog in the county. Nellis attempted to grab the dog by the scruff of his neck and thrust him through the open door of the barn, but Reb just dropped to his belly and scampered backwards, whimpering. It's obvious that whatever was in there was truly frightening Reb. The usually bold Reb's terrified reaction to whatever lurked within the barn was enough to convince Chief Berger to call in the troops. He radioed for help from neighboring police departments, and within hours, a dozen patrol cars had responded to his call. Nellis called 2 officers over, and they opened the barn and went inside. After a few moments, they realized that it was empty. The 3 men were puzzled. The dog had been trained to search buildings, and Nellis could not explain why it had refused to enter the barn. Unfortunately, or perhaps very fortunately, for those involved in the time that had elapsed between Reb's fearful display, the arrival of backup, whatever it was that had hidden in the barn, managed to slip out through the back. Not long after, the search was called off for the night, and the disappointed officers returned to their home bases. Nellis said his humble opinion it was a bear. We never got a good view of any tracks, Nellis said. Is there a Sasquatch? I don't know. It makes a very good story, though. But of course, typical with these type of creatures, this would not mark the end of the Big Muddy Monster saga, as sightings of this mysterious beast were reported 2 more times during the next week and a half. Berger claims that during this period, he was worried about the monster and more about one of the 10,000 Murfreesboro residents shooting another one of the many armed possessed that seemed to spring up like wildfire. So the next sighting that occurred, the next reported encounter with the beast, occurred approximately on July 4th, after a traveling carnival set up camp in Riverside Park on the banks of the river, still apparently favored by the creature. The carnival workers, apparently unaware of what was lurking nearby, chose a pleasant glade near the river, between the boat ramp and the sewage treatment plant located below the Ray House. At 2 a.m., long after the carnival had closed up for the night, 3 carnies, Otis Norris, Ray Atkerson, and Wesley Lavender, were sitting behind one of the carnival trucks discussing the day's receipts when they heard a series of whinnies coming from the Shetland ponies that were tied to the bramble of the other side of the truck. The men quickly got up to see what the commotion was all about, and were shocked to find the usually docile ponies, which had been trained to give children rides in endless circles like a merry-go-round, were in a tizzy with their eyes rolling in terror, furiously tugging at their ropes in a desperate bid to free themselves from their constraints. It wasn't long before the carnies would see what the frenzy was all about. The men maintained that they spied an 8-foot-tall, 400-pound creature, which, much like Missouri's Momo, seemed to have no distinguishable facial characteristics beneath its fur that seemed to be calmly watching the ponies. The men decided not to wait around to see what happened next, and immediately ran for help, claiming that the monster also ran in the opposite direction. Now, about an hour later, one of the carnival workers called in to help deal with this beast. Charles Kimball claimed that he saw the creature once again returning to the same spot and staring at the ponies with its head cocked to the side in what was described as a deeply curious pose. While this would prove to be the last eyewitness report of the creature, its reign of fear was not quite complete. The description given by the carnival workers this time was similar to earlier sightings, that of a creature 7 to 9 feet tall, 3 to 400 pounds, standing upright on two legs with whitish and light brown hair over its entire body. The carnival owner didn't report the encounter until July 7th because he was concerned it might scare away customers. Now, also, later that same night, a woman named Nedra Green asserted that she heard a screaming sound coming from a shed on her rural farm. She, wisely it would seem, chose to remain inside her home rather go out to investigate. Following the carnival sighting, yet another crowd of locals, most of whom were armed to the teeth, gathered in Riverside Park, hoping to take a shot at the furry white fiend. And once again, just like I had last week, I was able to find a few newspaper articles on the monster. This only exacerbated Berger's concerns for the townsfolk's safety, so he implored the town fathers to bring in expert help. The man they chose for the job was St. Louis insurance agent and serious student of Bigfoot reports, Harkan Sorkin, which I was unable to find a photo of, unfortunately, of him. Sorkin led a group of 5 men, including reporters from the Kansas City Star and a lawyer, into the woods near Murfreesboro in the fall of that year, in an effort to track and possibly capture the Murfreesboro mud monster. Sorkin claimed that private groups had offered as much as $2.5 million for the creature's capture. With that in mind, this small expedition came armed with a stun gun with the capacity to take down a 500-pound animal, as well as chocolate and bananas, which Sorkin stated they would use to pacify the beast. They also carried loaded shotguns, which they claimed would only be used if their safety were threatened. Sorkin further claimed that they had local zoos standing by and that arrangements had been made for a cage to be flown in by helicopter should they get lucky and manage to imprison the monster. Needless to say, this mini expedition, as with many, was met with very little success. Sorkin asserted, however, though, that they heard a very loud yell or guttural sound between a roar and a bellow, and saw huge footprints and found 2-inch saplings pulled out of the ground. Of course, it wasn't long before the press got their talents into this tale of a colossal mud-caked critter. The local paper, the Southern Illinoisan, ran a small story on the search, which was eventually picked up by the New York Times. And I did actually find the newspaper article of the New York Times talking about it. Unfortunately, this was from newspapers.com. I know, of course, you got to get a membership in order to make a copy of it. And of course, there are some parts that you got to pay for. So unfortunately, I was unable to get that newspaper article, but it is there on newspapers.com. These ones I was lucky enough to find for free because they were on other websites. So, and I forgot to put fade-ins for these ones too. So now, for months and years following the reported sightings, accounts were posted to the wire services and began turning up newspapers where they made big headlines. Even the New York Times sent a reporter to investigate. The story of the Big Muddy Monster was reported around the world, and soon the Murfreesboro Police Department was bombarded from letters from all around the country and even from as far away as South Africa, inquiring about the creature. Everyone from curiosity seekers to actual scientists pleaded with the local authorities to release more information. A seventh grade class in Mississippi enthusiastically requested any further details police could provide. The police department also received many letters from hunters and trappers who offered to track down the monster and kill or capture it. Two men from Oregon proposed that they do the job, writing that they would be willing to take on this adventure at only the cost of expenses and materials for doing so. A Florida man suggested baiting the beast with bread, eggs, and cheese, saying it could be a splendid attraction if you could have it in a little hut to show people. A California woman consulted with a psychic over the matter. These creatures, the psychic said, are of a different evolution than human, that they observe man, but want no part of his way of living. They have the ability to appear and disappear at will. And it's funny that she says that. This is probably one of the earliest kind of descriptions where, because there's this new theory on what Bigfoot could actually be. For many years, it was believed that Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, and as well as the big muddy monster and all these other type of ape-like creatures, not just here in the United States, but throughout North America and around the world, that they were all descendants of what's known as Gigantopithecus, which was the largest ape that ever lived, which I'll be talking a little bit more in a separate episode. And honestly, I still believe that myself. I still believe that this creature, along with many of the others, are still descendants of Gigantopithecus. But there's this new theory saying that Bigfoot, in this case, could be some type of extraterrestrial type creature, or it could be like a shapeshifter of some sort, like it because there's all these reports where it appears for a while and then all of a sudden it's never seen again. And there's often times when it's seen in one area and then all of a sudden it's seen in another area. So I'm kind of on the fence about it. I'm kind of still edgy, but at the same time I can understand where a lot of investigators and cryptozoologists are kind of aiming it towards. But I'm so in other words, I'm pretty much on the same team for that matter, but I still prefer the original origin story of what Bigfoot or Sasquatch, or in this case, the Murfreesboro Mud Monster, could really be. And I still think it's a descendant of Gigantopithecus in some way. So, and of course, believe it or not, among those who actually came out to investigate it is none other than, of course, famed cryptozoologist Loren Coleman. For some reason, the picture is not showing up. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I'm just going to have to read it from this way. Famed cryptozoologist Loren Coleman returned to Illinois less than 2 months after investigating the Enfield horror case, investigated the cases, and theorized that the creature was a type of Sasquatch, stating, I think it's within the context of other reports of a Bigfoot. Like West Coast Sasquatch reports, Coleman said this creature was hairy, but differs in the fact that nobody was able to see any distinguishing characteristics in the facial area. Coleman also felt that the Murfreesboro Mud Monster represented a distinct type of ape-like creature, distinct from its West Coast counterparts, and that they are known to be more aggressive. There's something very unique about this eastern Midwestern Bigfoot. From the reports from the Mud Monster, it seemed to frighten people the way it didn't in the West. After more than a dozen sightings all around Murfreesboro, it appeared as if the bizarre brute was turning the town upside down. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I heard this actually from the Monsters and Mysteries in America segment, but here's the thing. I mean, let's face it. You don't see someone from the Carbondale Daily News said this on the show, and he's right. And what he once said was, you don't see a 7-foot tall, 400-pound white monster coming out of the river every day. So, and in case anybody, I should have mentioned this earlier about exactly where the Big Muddy River is. The Big Muddy River pretty much runs just outside of Murfreesboro. It's a tributary to the Mississippi River. It's I think it's like a 220-mile long river. It and it gets its name from its very muddy appearance due to ice glaciers that once existed that had melted, thousands of years ago, and it melted on a relatively shallow area, which tends to be the reason why the Big Muddy River, hence its name, tends to be so muddy. But it, but anyways, as far as sightings go, despite all the media attention and scrutiny, or perhaps because of it, there was only one last sighting that happened a few months after the incidents that occurred during the 2 weeks of June and July in the fall. A local trucker reported seeing the creature several miles southwest of town near the Mississippi River, into which the Big Muddy River feeds. Unfortunately, the creature vanished before he could get a good look at it. It did, however, once again leave some large footprints behind in the mud. Researchers made some plaster casts made by the creature, but were unable to determine if they matched the previous footprints or the work of a prankster, of course, which that does kind of make it controversial for that matter. But after that one last gap, the Big Muddy Monster vanished. However, believe it or not, even though this kind of ended the original reports, that didn't necessarily signify the total end for the Big Muddy Monster, because over the next 3 years, there were sporadic reports throughout the area of animals that resembled the Murfreesboro Mud Monster. On September 2nd, 1974, 3 Anna youths reported seeing it in the Beech Grove area near Wolf Lake in Union County. And these are all, even though it's not in Murfreesboro anymore, these are still certain counties and areas and towns throughout southern Illinois, or southwestern Illinois for that matter. But perhaps the most intriguing of these sightings occurred on January 26, 1975, when 4 truckers, all of whom were traveling separately, radioed in reports of seeing a bizarre bear-like creature near the Illinois 149 junction west of Murfreesboro. On July 7th, 2 Murfreesboro men reported a sighting of a strange creature that they believed may have been the Big Muddy Monster near a pond in the Harrison community north of Murfreesboro. Needless to say, these isolated events are no way compared to the tremendous flap of encounters that had plagued the community in the summer of 1973. On June 19th, 1976, 3 youths said that they saw something near the Westwood Hills subdivision, which was near the area of 2 previous sightings in Jackson County. They said it came walking out of the shadows in muck around the river, stinking of the dank river. The massive bulk of its 8-foot frame struck terror in those who reported it. But like a curious child, it only stared at the people who came across its path. Or sometimes it screamed a shrill, unearthly cry. In all, at least 21 people reported seeing the Murfreesboro Mud Monster in 12 separate incidents between July 26, 1972 and June 19, 1976. And 7 reports came in or near Murfreesboro, 1 from Cairo, and 1 from near Wolf Lake. And believe it or not, it was often believed that after that, there were no more reported sightings, not just in Murfreesboro, but in any area of southern Illinois. That was until, put it this way, however, that was until about 12 years later, after a decade of silence. 12 years later, in June of 1988, the Big Muddy Monster made headlines again. Bob Ryman owned a salvage garage business on the outskirts of Murfreesboro. The yard was backed right up to the river's edge. Previously, they've had a few people who've broken into the place, mostly teenagers, so he decided to hire a security guard by the name of Charlie Straub. And put it this way, this particular sighting it's almost like to me in some way that not only did the big money monster seem to have some kind of return, but it almost like was desperate to get one last act of attention, if you will. One chilly night in June, Charlie heard something moving about in the garage. He then gave Bob a call and reported that someone was in the yard. Bob, believing it to be a robbery in progress, came over to investigate. They headed over to the back of the yard, didn't see any signs of a break in or anything stolen, but they did hear something moving around, and then suddenly a terrible odor took in, to which Bob described it as to being a cross to rotten eggs and a skunk. They then saw the huge creature emerge from the darkness, and it let out an unearthly scream like a siren. Again, pictures weren't showing up until the end. It let out an unearthly scream like a siren and raised to a really high pitch. It had yellow teeth, and its eyes were glowing red, like as Bob described as two taillights on a car. Bob's first thought was both he and Charlie were going to be killed by the creature. Bob then pulled out his .357 Magnum Smith & Wesson handgun and pointed at the creature and asked Charlie if he should shoot it. But Charlie, believing that the gun was only making the creature angrier, told him not to. The creature started picking up objects and throwing at them. Immediately, they ran out of the yard and retreated back to the shop. And this image that I have right here, you guys can probably see on the bottom. This is another actual sketch that was made by Bob Ryman, describing exactly what he saw that night in June of 1988. That is the actual drawing right there. So definitely a very intimidating and scary sight indeed. Now, then Ryman then called his sister Joyce Tyndall and several other witnesses on the phone to come down to the yard, telling her that he and Charlie saw the Murfreesboro Mud Monster. The group, consisting of Bob, Charlie, Joyce, Bob's brother Ronnie, his mother Irma, his wife Cheryl, his 15-year-old son Bobby, and Charlie's 12-year-old son Sean. Bob's mother Irma remembers thinking it was a hoax. We were going to tease them and say we were going to call the men in the white coats, she said. But when we got there, we weren't so sure. When they arrived, they did not believe in Bob and Charlie's story, believing they were playing a prank, but did see that the men were very scared. Not long after their arrival in the area, she also caught a whiff of the smell that resembled something like a skunk that fell in a sewer. Joyce Tyndall also thought it was a joke until her sighting. We knew it wasn't a person from its size and height, she said. It stood up and I was in total shock. I couldn't get anything out of my mouth. You'd think you were looking at a gigantic bear. This, I believe, is another sketch. I think that might have been what Joyce might have written. I mean, had created. Then she said she recalled that the same obnoxious smell had wafted in her window, not far from the garage the night before. Living out in the country, you could smell anything, Tyndall said. Then we heard it drinking from the dog's pan. It was slurping like a person. Fear kept her from getting up to investigate, claimed Tyndall, although she thinks now it isn't dangerous. Bob said they watched it for several intervals of about 30 seconds each as it reappeared among salvaged cars or tall grass. Since the big muddy monster was working its way closer each time it reappeared, they began making their way back to the garage in an effort to draw it into range of a security light. It never went under the light, but instead it went around the back and banged on the side of the garage as to what Joyce described as sound like a gunshot, which scared everybody inside. The only thing I could figure was he was as curious as we were of him, Ryman said. However, after hearing the bang, she then believed this monster was going to kill everyone inside as it continued to bang on the wall as well as growl loudly and aggressively. Bob believed that this creature sounded like it really wanted to get inside the building and believed that it could have enough strength to hurt them. The group stood staring at the wall, scared of what was going to happen next. After what felt like an eternity, the big money monster eventually left the yard and disappeared back into the night. But Ryman claims to have found a footprint near the Missouri Pacific Railroad tracks behind the salvage yard that is about 14 inches long, about 4 inches wide. And I believe this is where the footprint is. I know you can't really see it too well. It's too bad there's no way I could try to outline it so that way, because even I'm having a little bit of trouble trying to see the exact print itself, but I do recall that it is somewhere around this area. And that's, of course, Bob right there himself. He is featured on the Monsters and Mysteries in America segment, and so is his sister. So, but I would say it was pretty much right around here where they discovered the footprint. Of course, considering it's been 35 years, it since is filled with water. Afterwards, Ryman wanted to call authorities, but Straub, who has gone on a camping trip and couldn't be contacted, this was a few days after the encounter. That's why it says he was on a camping trip and couldn't be contacted, advised him otherwise for fear of ridicule. Ryman is convinced he's seen something like a Sasquatch of the Northwest or a Yeti of the Himalayas. And with rumors of the sighting floating around Jackson County, he has received calls from others who claim similar encounters. Ryman's mother, Irma, has become a believer too. Let's just say I don't care to hang out alone in the back junkyard, she said. Now, later that year, the monster appeared to a couple men gigging frogs. Other area residents have claimed to catch a glimpse of the monster. Now, to kind of put this to an end as far as sightings, the last and most recent report of the Big Money Monster was in August of 1989. According to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper, the Murfreesboro Mud Monster emerged again as a possible culprit to an attack that allegedly occurred at the Wren Lake campground near Benton. During the attack, gaping holes were left in a tent, and animal blood was left behind at the scene. The attack was later determined to have been from dogs, but that didn't stop local residents from speculating about the Big Money Monster again. In the 1989 newspaper reports, Jerry Nellis, the dog handler in the original case, stated his own theories of the famous case, which left he and the other witnesses as the events as hunted as the Murfreesboro Mud Monster itself. Reporters and monster hunters came from everywhere, asking questions about the case, but Nellis maintained that, in my opinion, we were tracking a bear. Afterwards, the Big Money Monster had all but vanished completely. The rest of Southern Illinois, and for every outdoorsman who has, as Nellis suggests, seen something we can't make out just beyond the headlights, that original vision reported to police on June 25th, 1973, is all we need to imagine. Now, it bears noting, ironically, just to give some similarities to another cryptid, it bears noting that in July of 1969, there were reports of a large, hairy, white creature called the Lake Worth Monster, and this is supposedly an actual picture of it that was photographed during one of the encounters, hailing, not surprisingly, from Lake Worth, in this case in Texas. While most assumed that this was a standard hairy hominid sighting, there were some who insisted that it was a hybrid beast that was half man, half goat, much like Maryland's infamous Goat Man, which eventually we will be covering those two cryptids in later episodes. Needless to say, these isolated events are no way compared to the tremendous flap of encounters that had plagued the community in the summer of 1973. Perhaps Police Chief Toby Berger puts it into most succinctly when he said, "A lot of things in life are unexplained, and this is another one. We don't know what the creature is, but we do believe what these people saw was real. I never did see it, but in my mind, I feel those people really did see something, Ron Manwaring said. I guess it just remains a mystery. Randy Needham, one of the first to see the monster in 1973, recently said it would be kind of naive for us to think we know everything that's out there. He went out to admit that he never goes into the woods at night anymore. Randy Creeth, who reported observing the creature the evening of June 25th, is tired of talking about it. People often just think the story is crazy, he said, and parts of it have been greatly exaggerated over time. While Creeth is done revisiting the tale, he maintains he saw something that night. I'm tired of people misconstruing what I saw. And what exactly did he see? Some have pointed out that it was a bear or some other animal brought away from the river by high flooding that year. Others, of course, have speculated that it was simply a man in a suit looking to scare a few unsuspecting teenagers, which is often usually used as the explanation for some of these Bigfoot type creatures. Larry Tincher doesn't know what it was, but he knows that people saw something. He's not convinced it was a person. Anybody that would and here's the thing, I mean, you're talking about an area you're talking Southern Illinois, right? When I said earlier about that, it's kind of a different world down there compared to where I live in the Chicago area. In fact, what he says is that anybody that would put on a costume and do this would be stupid, said Tincher, who went on to become chief of the Murfreesboro Police Department for about 12 years before retiring in 1991. You're talking Southern Illinois. You could very well imagine, as he says, this is hunting country. It'd be a good way to get shot around here. So I think, honestly, if this was truly a guy in a costume and you're basically in an area where most people have guns and hunt that area, I honestly think dressing up and trying to pull those kind of pranks in an area like Southern Illinois is definitely not the smartest idea. So Southern Illinois kind of more reflects on that of what you would kind of see in the Southern lifestyle. So you do something stupid, or in this case, you dress up, and if you dress up and you start scaring people, most likely there's a good chance you're going to get shot by even if it's not really something to play around with. Christian Barrell, who was only 5 when he reported seeing the creature, also wasn't convinced it was a person. Whatever it was, managed to evade and even frighten the search dog, he pointed out, and it appeared in thinly populated areas, less than ideal for an ambitious prankster. I really doubt it was a person playing a joke, he said. Barrell, now an attorney in Carbondale, doesn't frequently volunteer his story of the monster, but he is enthused to speak about it when asked. He shares an inviolable attachment to a real-life tale of terror, and he enjoys recounting what he knows. Like stories of UFOs or the Loch Ness Monster, Barrell said the tale of the Murfreesboro Mud Monster highlights how people either believe something is real or they don't. He, however, is comfortable with the gray area in the middle, a place many people don't find as appealing. Personally, I don't know what it was, Barrell said. Like with UFOs, you believe in them or you don't. There's really no room in our society for people not to know. And he's absolutely right in that matter. Whatever it was or wasn't. However, one thing is for sure, Barrell will never forget the terror he felt that night 50 years ago. It must have been something, he said. What it was, I really have no idea. Bob Ryman and his sister Joyce haven't forgotten their experience with the creature in 1988. It occurred 35 years ago, and they still remember that night like it was yesterday. Now, in case you guys are ever interested in wanting to go down to Murfreesboro, here's actually, I guess you got to say a word of some things that you should know if you guys ever decide to go down to this town. And this was all very recent in the last 2 years. In 2021, the Murfreesboro Mud Monster was added as part of a new mural painted on the side of a historical building in the downtown area and pays homage to items of interest from both the present and the past. It includes images of apples, rivers, the nearby Shawnee National Forest, and the creature itself as a representation of Murfreesboro's history and culture. The next year, in 2022, a full mural of the monster was painted on the side of another building located behind 104 North 14th in the alley in Murfreesboro. And I got to say, that's a pretty cool mural that they made. Very similar to what you see in a few other towns that have some of these notorious cryptids. It's quite obvious that Murfreesboro is trying to achieve that same ranking or notoriety, if you will, with its own creature, with its own monster. And if that's not enough, very much like the Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Oh wait, yeah, actually no. Before that, hold that thought. This mural, the second one, depicts those evenings and sightings of the Big Money Monster throughout the 1970s and late 1980s, and is now a famous tourist attraction. So now, here's what I was going to say. But what they also added, very much like with the Mothman statue in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, earlier this year, in June of 2023, in honor of the 50th anniversary of the original Big Money Monster sightings of June and July 1973, a statue of the monster was added as another monster landmark for Murfreesboro during the Big Money Monster Festival, which, damn it, like I said earlier, I could have been there to see it being presented for everybody. Damn it. But at least it's still there. But get this, the bronze 8-foot 8-inch statue weighs nearly 800 pounds. A Salt Lake City-based company created the statue, and get this, they used the Murfreesboro police report's description to come up with its looks. So it pretty much appears exactly as what witnesses reported from 1973, which that's very impressive. Of course, it still has that same position with the classic Patterson Gimlin Bigfoot appearance of it looking over its shoulder. So nice little homage to that. Now, as far as Murfreesboro, Illinois today, since then, there have not been any recent sightings of the Murfreesboro Mud Monster since 1989. Although that doesn't mean it's still out there, probably still lurking in the murky waters of the Big Muddy River. But keep watch if you are near the Big Muddy River on a dark night. You never know what you might see. For you might see a dirty, white, hairy figure standing there with its sick, horrible stench burning into your nostrils and its red, glowing eyes staring right back at you. And so, for that matter, what I'm about to say is actually a famous line from a paranormal and cryptid show that's sadly no longer runs. I decided to kind of pay homage to it. I forgot to do it last week. If any of you guys ever remembered that show, Lost Tapes, they often had a certain question that they would leave at the end of each episode. So that question is, in this case, with the Big Money Monster, even though there haven't been any sightings since 1989, with that being said, we are left to wonder, does it live among us? And that is officially it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Okay, so I'm gonna go real quick on the comments because I do have to get off. I got to get off because I know there's 2 shows running. Okay, so real quick, Charles, I wonder if Sasquatch uses the smell to hunt. That's actually a good theory, Charles. I never even thought of that, but it was that's another theory. I'm gonna have to look into that. That's a good theory. Dang, it's stuck at work. What's up, Johnny? Hey, Robert. Hope you're doing well. Hello, Mort. Okay, yeah. Okay, they are different tribes and maybe different creatures. You got a good point there. Hello, Donna. Good to see you. Okay, well, at least Eric enjoys it. Okay, well, I know I went a little bit over time, but as always, I like to thank you guys, for tuning in, taking the time and to tune into this. Like I always say, I do this for you guys on most occasions, and seeing that you guys are really enjoying these cryptid episodes, it's definitely worthwhile putting these presentations together. Um, I'm not sure what we're going to be talking about to the grave and back for tomorrow. I'm gonna have to check in with Lois on that. And then Supernatural talk tomorrow night. We're going to be having Kate Frazee back on the show. It was going to be an open mic show, but I think we're going to have her back on. So it'll be great to chat with her again. And then for Friday on the Frighteners, I believe we're going to be talking about, I think we're going to be talking about Skinwalker Ranch, which that's going to be a good episode if that's the case. So, and now as far as next week's episode of Nick Files, the next cryptid that I have in mind, and this is once again, I got a few more of these cryptids from Illinois before we start expanding to other states and countries. Oh wait, okay, no, Eric basically, okay, Eric somehow I don't know how he found out, but okay, so it's mental health, okay. But anyways, the next episode that we'll be focusing on for next week, and this is something some of you guys may have heard from, but ironically enough, although I said that this is still kind of based on cryptids in Illinois, this certain cryptid not only has been reported in certain areas of Illinois, including the southern part of the state, but it's also been reported in other states. And it's clear there's more than one of this type of creature in this matter that has been reported in other states as well as other countries from all around the world, including even supposedly photographic and video evidence of these creatures. And we're going to be talking about the cryptid or cryptids for that matter. We'll be talking about what are known as the Phantom Panthers, or also known as alien big cats or ABCs. Put it this way, to make a long story short, they are said to be like large cat-like panther, jaguar, almost lion type creatures that are seen in areas that are not they are not relatively native to certain areas. And when I mean areas that they're not really native to, we're talking again like parts of southern Illinois, some other states. We're not talking basically like mountain lions for that kind of matter. So it'll be an interesting episode. So but anyways, with that being said, because I got to get off here once again, I like to thank everybody who was able to tune in. And as far as I can tell you, I'll see some of you guys tomorrow to the grave and back, as well as Supernatural Talk and Frighteners. But as I always like to put it, if you'd rather want to wait to the next episode of Nick Files, in this case talking about Phantom Panthers, alien big cats, or ABCs, I will see you guys next week. You guys all have a good rest of your night. Take care now.